Last week in a video on changing bandsaw blades and how to make all the ancillary adjustments on it, I made a pronouncement that the bandsaw was a one power tool that I just would not want to deal without in my hand tool based workshop. So today I thought I'd show you a few hand techniques on using a bandsaw. In my production process, this thing right here is basically a replacement for all hand saws and frame saws. I don't really have too many panel saws like this. I have one rip one for doing demonstrations and stuff, and I have a lot of crosscut ones for breaking stock down to be more usable on the bandsaw. And just like these things, these are not the last cuts that's going to touch a board. I'm going to hand plane it or sand it or do something with it. Other than cutting tenons on a Morrison tenon joint, everything else gets touched by another tool. So if you have that mentality, you can do a lot with a bandsaw. Now when you're working with a bandsaw, it's incredibly important that you have access all the way around it, because there are a lot of instances where I find pulling my work through the blade is a lot safer and a lot more accurate. So I want to be able to walk around it fairly unobstructed. I have a fairly long hose on my dust collector just for that purpose. Now, one of the most common things I do with either a handsaw or my bandsaw is making long rip cuts, because you're breaking down the wood. There is no reason why you can't move the fence over and push it through. Just make sure you use some kind of push stick so that once you get through the back section, if you want to push it into the blade, you don't really care. I will say this. Most of the time when I'm doing these cuts, I will start it here, but then I will pull it through on the backside, so my hands never really approach this front section. But I also don't really use this fence very often unless it's a large enough board that I have to stand back quite a ways from the bandsaw. You know, a 4 to 6 foot board you're making a little slice off of. Most of the time, I'm just going to come up here and I'm going to position this finger on my table at the exact distance I need, and then my thumb becomes a micro adjuster, because when you put your thumb flat down way back here, you can kind of press down into your table and it will slightly move the back a little bit. You have this hand pressing over here this way to give you somewhat of an adjustable fence that changes on the fly. So as you're feeding your work into your blade, you can make micro adjustments until the point where the back of it passes your thumb, and then the thumb you can use the thumb as a push stick to come on through your cut. If anything ever bad happens, just let go. Walk away. You can come back and turn it off in a second, but because the force is going down, there's nothing really making it dance, so you can actually let go of it and back away if you're scared for whatever reason. If your spidey senses start to tingling, just back off. But I want you to notice something. Not only am I focusing on cutting right next to the line, using the same rules you would use with a hand tool, but with a bandsaw, if I focus on the blade and the kerf behind it, as long as I keep the kerf hiding in the shadow of the blade, I know I'm cutting a straight line. So there you go, a completely straight cut done on the bandsaw, just as good as any handsaw could do it, you know, a rough coarse handsaw. I didn't get my hand anywhere near the blade, and at no point was my hand going into the blade. That's a key safety thing. Even when I'm turning curves, I never push my hand into the blade. It is always going around it. Let me pull out a bowl blank and show you that exact process. So I've got a nice little blow blank, and I've laid out a circle out of chalk right here. But notice when I cut these things, I leave them a little bit long because I want something to grab on here. I want to be able to push it through. The blade's right here, but notice my effort is going around here, or it's coming around this way. It is never pushing into the blade. So here we go. Watch the technique. Watch how my thumbs stay out. They're not tucked around here, which would mean it would be pushing into the blade, which I don't want to do. I want to keep my thumbs out. I've got corners on, and I rotate in a circle around the blade, never pushing into it. So I now got a nice little bowl blank, and I didn't risk my fingers, thumbs, skin, or anything like that on the bandsaw. Now joinery is another common thing I do freehand on the bandsaw. And you can use the same techniques I showed you for cutting straight lines as to cutting joinery. But, for example, I have a little finger joint recess cut out right here. On the bandsaw, I leave this 1/2 inch blade on there. There's no way I can turn that tight corner. So how can you do it? Once again, it's all a matter of using your fingers as a brace and controlling the angles with your thumbs and the other hand pushing on this way to go forward. And then I'm going to show you how to get these tight corners actually utilizing the teeth, because the teeth are actually crossing over on each side. One to cut to one side, one to cut the other, and then the center tooth to scrape it out. This is somewhat of a combination blade. Notice I left the pencil line. There's no way I can turn that 90-degree corners, especially with a 1/2 inch blade, which I'm too lazy to ever replace. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect the corners with gradual curves and create a relief area for the blade to fit into. If you have a narrow channel, there's no reason why you couldn't use a set of the teeth to do that one. So once again, I'm going to use the same techniques. Come on, do both sides of my dado for narrow groove. Notice, once again, thumb back here, finger pivot point up here. Now I can come in and you can kind of whittle it out. Get rid of the very base, just go sideways, back and forth. And you can kind of shave down the very bottom like that to get a fairly square cut. Now if I am cutting a very long board, which is really kind of common for me, I cut a lot of 2x12s down to get the nicer quarter sawn board from that. Yes, I use a bandsaw. And I'm going to try and show you on a shorter board because I just don't want to waste boards. But what happens is I will start from this side using the fence. And I can take one hand to squeeze it against the fence and one hand to push it through. Eventually you're going to get to a point where even on a long board you kind of have a balance spot because we have about 1.5 feet here and it bounces out. At which point in time I go to the other side and I drag it through because I find it a lot easier to drag it through, and it's a lot safer as the weight gets on this side of the bandsaw. You don't want to be doing that last little bit, having to hold 8 feet of 2x12 material with your fingers and not get it cut. Remember, the idea is we never want to push into the blade, so if we can pull through, a lot safer. And get about halfway through, and even on small boards, I will come around and pull it through. You can put pressure on this side and it does the same thing, pushing it this way. And just keep the board coming through. The bandsaw really is the closest thing to a hand tool in the power tool realm because it does require finger dexterity, muscle memory, eye-hand coordination, all the things we use with a handsaw, chisel, or something like that, that all happens here. The only thing that's stopped is the blade's moving. And the way the blade is moving, always in one direction, just like a handsaw, always cutting in one direction, gives you the same kind of results you would often find with a handsaw. So, try it. Don't be scared of the bandsaw. It really is the most flexible tool you have out there. In fact, I went for probably a decade without even using a table saw, just doing everything on the bandsaw, and hand tools. For today's bonus, I want to talk about the Book of Plates from Lost Art Press. Let me just say this. There are books, and then there are books. I don't know if you want to call this a coffee table book or an inspirational book. I mean, I don't think there's any text in the entire thing except for the opening credits and a few titles on pictures, but it is basically an entire book of Roubaud's plates that he used to make his other texts and stuff like that from all different categories. I mean, if you want to learn how to make a carriage, there are plans for it. You want to make doors for carriages. Everything he ever drew for any of the books is in here. Tools. Making tools. You can find the diagrams and pictures in there for that. I mean, this thing is just incredible. I was gifted this book probably 4 or 5 years ago when I had a woodworking school, and I used to leave this by the front door on the bench close to the door, and customers or students would come in here, and you could always tell a past woodworker who was just stopping by to talk, because they would find this book, they would open it up, and then they'd spend the next half hour just flipping pages, looking at the diagrams in awe. I mean, this thing is incredible. There's that Book of Plates with the Roubaud bench, all the tools, the vices, all that kind of stuff laid out for you. I mean, just incredible. It's not a cheap book, but I can almost guarantee you will get more entertainment out of just looking through this thing than just about anything that's been published out there. I mean, really cool book. Pick it up if you can.